honey, I think you've made a wrong turn." The flight attendant's voice, sharp and syrupy sweet, cut through the quiet hum of the first-class boarding area. She tapped a long, blood-red nail on the podium. "This is the priority lane for our non-stop service to Geneva. I think the gate for the domestic flight to Cleveland is that way." She pointed vaguely down the concourse, her smile never reaching her cold, dismissive eyes. She looked down at the ticket in the young black man's hand and let out a soft, condescending chuckle, a sound that would soon echo in the ruins of her career. The air in Terminal D of JFK International was a familiar symphony of chaos and anticipation. The scent of overpriced coffee cleaning fluid and the faint, thrilling tang of jet fuel hung in the air. People from every walk of life rushed past, dragging roller bags and clutching passports, their faces a mixture of stress and excitement. Yet at Gate 47, an oasis of calm presided. This was the boarding area for Skyline Airlines Flight 220, a direct 10-hour journey to Geneva, Switzerland. Here the carpets were plusher, the chairs were leather, and the passengers spoke in the hushed, confident tones of people to whom luxury was not a treat, but an expectation. 17-year-old Alexander Wilson stood patiently in the short priority line. He was tall and lanky, with the kind of effortless grace that often comes with youth. He wore a simple but well-tailored navy blue travel blazer over a plain white t-shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of clean, unassuming sneakers. On his wrist was a simple digital watch, and in his hand he held his passport and a first-class ticket, a single slip of expensive cardstock bearing the Skyline Airlines logo, a stylized golden wingspan. He was listening to music through a pair of high-end earbuds, a gentle jazz trio that helped him tune out the terminal's noise and focus on the exciting prospect of his summer internship. Before we dive deeper into this story, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. The terminal bustled around Alex, but in his private soundscape of piano bass and drums, he found a moment of peace. His eyes drifted to the massive windows where Skyline's flagship aircraft waited, its polished white fuselage gleaming in the afternoon sun. The sight still gave him a small thrill, not because of the luxury it represented, but because of what it meant to his family, the realization of his father's vision. Two gray-haired passengers ahead of him were greeted with warm smiles and effusive welcomes. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. and Mrs. Thornton." The attendant practically cooed at them. Alex removed one earbud as he stepped forward next in line. Alex Wilson had grown up in the shadow of aviation greatness. His father, James Wilson, had built Skyline Airlines from a two-plane regional carrier into a global aviation powerhouse. But unlike many heirs to business empires, Alex had never been permitted to coast on his father's success. The world will give you nothing you don't fight for. Alex, his father, had said 1,000 times, "Privilege is a starting line, not a finish line." Those words had shaped Alex's childhood and adolescence. While his peers at private school flaunted their family connections, Alex had deliberately kept his low profile. He'd earned his place at the prestigious Thompson Academy through a blind academic scholarship application. He joined the debate team, the engineering club, and maintained a perfect GPA, all while learning the fundamentals of his father's business during weekends and holidays. This summer internship in Geneva wasn't a gift. He'd spent the last year meticulously preparing for it. It wasn't just a trip. It was a rite of passage, 3 months working in the international finance division of one of his father's subsidiary companies. He'd earned it with his grades, his independent projects, and a presentation that had genuinely impressed a board of directors who thought they were merely humoring the boss's kid. As the line inched forward, Alex reflected on the path that had led him to this moment. His mother had passed away when he was just 8, leaving James Wilson to raise his only son alone. Perhaps that was why his father had been so insistent on preparing Alex for a world that would judge him not just by his last name, but by the color of his skin. The memory of his father's own struggle surfaced, a story James rarely told, but that had shaped their family's legacy. 25 years earlier, James Wilson had been denied a seat on a flight to a crucial business meeting despite having a confirmed ticket. The gate agent had insisted there must be some mistake, that someone like him couldn't possibly have a business class reservation. By the time the situation was resolved, the flight had departed and James had missed the meeting that could have secured vital funding for his fledgling airline. I built Skyline partly because I never wanted anyone to experience what I did that day James had told Alex on his 16th birthday. But I know the world hasn't changed as much as we'd like to believe. You'll have to be twice as good to get half as much respect. It's not fair, but it's reality. And the best response isn't anger, it's excellence. Alex had taken those lessons to heart. He'd learned to observe before reacting to document, rather than denounce, and to convert obstacles into opportunities. It was a philosophy that had served him well, and one he was about to put into practice in a way neither he nor his father could have anticipated. His thoughts drifted to Geneva, the pristine lake, the global finance hub, the opportunity to prove himself in a foreign environment. He imagined himself walking into the office on his first day, making a strong impression, establishing his own identity beyond the Wilson name. Have you ever had to maintain your dignity in the face of disrespect? Let us know in the comments below. Alex pulled out his earbuds completely, the gentle jazz replaced by the crisp, amplified voice of the gate agent announcing the final boarding call for first-class passengers. He stepped forward, ticket and passport in hand. The flight attendant manning the gate, Vanessa Powell, was a woman in her late 40s with meticulously coiffed blonde hair that seemed frozen in place by a cloud of hairspray. Her makeup was a mask of professionalism, but her eyes held a weary, judgmental glint. Her uniform was immaculate, every pleat precise, every gold button gleaming the perfect representation of Skyline's premium service image. What no one at the gate could know was that Vanessa's crisp exterior concealed a mounting personal bitterness. Her own son had recently been rejected from 3 universities, despite her sacrificing for years to afford his education. Meanwhile, she'd watched what she perceived as less qualified students receive scholarships and admissions, many of them minorities. Rather than examining the complex factors at play, she had channeled her disappointment into resentment, finding comfort in the belief that the system was rigged against people like us, as she often complained to colleagues. "Good afternoon, Alex," said his voice clear and confident. Vanessa took the documents without making eye contact, her fingers expertly tapping at her keyboard. Then she paused. Her eyes flicked from the screen to the ticket, and then, for the first time, up to Alex's face. A slow, condescending smile spread across her lips, a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. That's when she spoke the words that would set everything in motion. "Oh, honey, I think you've made a wrong turn." Alex blinked momentarily, confused. "I'm sorry. This is the priority lane for our non-stop service to Geneva," she said, her voice dripping with artificial patience as if explaining a complex concept to a small child. "I think the gate for the domestic flight to Cleveland is that way." She gestured vaguely with a flick of her wrist, not even bothering to look in the direction she was pointing. The jab, though nonsensical, was clear in its intent. It was designed to diminish to place him somewhere else, somewhere less. Alex felt a familiar hot flush of anger creep up his neck, but he pushed it down, his father's voice echoing in his mind. "Observe. Don't react." He kept his own voice even. "I believe I'm at the right gate. Flight 220 to Geneva." Vanessa's smile tightened. She picked up his ticket, holding it between 2 fingers as if it were a soiled tissue. "Right. This ticket." She let out a soft, airy chuckle. It wasn't a loud laugh, but in the relative quiet of the first-class lounge, it was as sharp as a slap. The couple in cashmere who were gathering their carry-ons nearby turned to look. "Seat 2A first class." She read aloud, her tone a perfect blend of mock surprise and utter disbelief. My. Did you win a competition? Or perhaps your employer is just incredibly generous. The implication hung poisonously in the air. There was no conceivable way in her world that he could belong here on his own merit. He had to be a fluke, a charity case, an anomaly that disturbed the natural order of things. For a brief electric moment, Alex felt the words rising in his throat. My father owns this airline. The revelation would be satisfying. He could picture Vanessa's smug expression crumbling into horror. His hand even twitched toward his wallet where he kept his company ID with the executive family designation. But he caught himself remembering his father's wisdom. The moment you use our name as a weapon, you've lost the real battle. An older man in a tailored suit standing nearby raised an eyebrow, his attention caught by the exchange. His eyes, shrewd and observant, moved from Vanessa to Alex, taking in the situation with quiet assessment. Is there a problem with my ticket? Alex asked, his voice level despite the tension building inside him. A middle-aged woman in line behind Alex cleared her throat loudly, her disapproval aimed squarely at Vanessa. For heaven's sake, just process his boarding pass. We'd all like to get on the plane sometime today. Vanessa's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, bureaucratic indifference. There's no problem. She clipped her voice now hard. She scanned his ticket with a violent, angry motion. The machine beeped its sterile confirmation. It just seems unlikely. She slapped his passport and boarding pass down on the counter. Enjoy your flight, sir. She said the word, sir, now loaded with a thick, sarcastic venom. She turned away from him before he had even picked them up, already focusing on the next passenger with a renewed and pointedly warmer smile. The older man in the suit frowned slightly, his gaze lingering on Alex with what appeared to be a mixture of curiosity and concern. The woman who had spoken up gave Alex a small nod of solidarity as he collected his documents. From nearby, a young white businessman in an expensive suit sneered to his companion just loudly enough to be heard. That's what affirmative action looks like. Taking spots from people who earned them. His friend chuckled uncomfortably, glancing around to see if anyone had overheard. Alex absorbed it all, cataloging each reaction, each microaggression, each small act of solidarity or complicity. This wasn't just about one rude gate agent anymore. It was a window into how people behaved when confronted with someone they perceived as out of place in their exclusive world. Alex stood motionless for a moment, his hand resting on his passport and ticket. The insult still rang in his ears, clear as the boarding announcements overhead. He could have said 1,000 things. He could have told her exactly who he was. He could have pulled out his phone and made a call that would have ended her career right there on the plush carpet of Gate 47. But that wasn't his father's way, and it wasn't his. A public spectacle would be emotional and unsatisfying. True consequences were organizational, not theatrical. Instead, he chose his words carefully. I'm simply a paying passenger, ma'am. Thank you for your assistance. The ma'am was a deliberate choice, a small act of asserting his own maturity and civility in the face of her rudeness. It seemed to irritate her more than any insult could have. As Alex walked down the jet bridge, the hushed conversation of the couple behind him reached his ears. Well, I never, the woman whispered. The nerve of some people. Alex wasn't sure if they were talking about him or Vanessa. He suspected it was him. Another passenger, a young Asian woman who had witnessed the exchange, caught up to him in the jet bridge. That was incredibly handled, she said quietly. I would have lost my cool completely. Thank you, Alex replied, genuinely appreciative of the unexpected support. I've been there, she added. Different stereotype, same dismissal. With a small smile, she moved ahead to her seat in business class. He stepped onto the aircraft, the cool, recycled air a welcome change. A different flight attendant, a man with a kind face and tired eyes, greeted him at the door. His name tag read, Michael Garcia. Welcome aboard, sir. Can I show you to your seat? Michael's smile was genuine, his tone respectful. Thank you. 2A. Alex said, his voice steady despite the lingering tremor of humiliation. Michael nodded. Right this way. One of our best suites on the aircraft. Alex found his seat a spacious private suite with its own door, a lie-flat bed, and a large entertainment screen. It was the pinnacle of commercial air travel. He stowed his carry-on and settled into the soft leather, the insult still ringing in his ears. It just seems unlikely. He looked out the small window at the ground crew moving about on the tarmac. He knew this airline. He knew its history, its fleet, its corporate structure. He knew the name of the CEO, the man who had built it from 2 leased airplanes into a global titan of aviation. He knew him because he saw him every morning at the breakfast table. Alex took a deep breath. Vanessa had no idea. She thought she had just put some upstart kid in his place. She couldn't possibly comprehend that she had just laughed in the face of Alexander Wilson, the only son of James Wilson, the founder and owner of the very airline that paid her salary. And Alex, sitting quietly in seat 2A, decided he wouldn't enlighten her. He would simply observe. The flight to Geneva was long. He would give her every opportunity to show him who she really was. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "Mr. Wilson," Michael asked, approaching with a tablet in hand. "Just some sparkling water with lime, please," Alex replied. Michael nodded. "Right away, sir." As Michael walked away, Alex noticed that the older gentleman who had observed the gate incident was being seated across the aisle in 3B. Their eyes met briefly, and the man gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that somehow contained both acknowledgement and apology. The cabin door sealed with a heavy, satisfying thud, shutting out the noise of the terminal and cocooning the first-class passengers in a world of quiet efficiency. Alex slid the door of his suite partially closed, creating a semblance of privacy. He watched as the flight attendants moved through the cabin, their motions practiced and precise. What Alex couldn't know was that in exactly 10 hours, the career of Vanessa Powell would come crashing down around her, dismantled not by a teenager's vengeance, but by her own actions documented with clinical precision. The first-class cabin of Skyline Flight 220 was a masterpiece of luxury aviation design. Just 8 private suites arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each with sliding doors that could transform the space into a private sanctuary. The cabin's color palette was understated elegance, cream, leather walnut accents, and brushed gold fixtures. Soft lighting glowed from hidden sources, creating an atmosphere of exclusive tranquility. Alex settled into his suite, running his fingers over the control panel that would adjust everything from his seat position to the ambient lighting. He wasn't impressed by the luxury. He had flown in these suites many times, but he appreciated the craftsmanship. His father had personally overseen the design, insisting on materials that would age gracefully and systems that prioritized quiet reliability over flashy features. A young flight attendant approached his suite with a genuine smile. Her name tag read, Sophia Rodriguez. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Wilson," she said, glancing quickly at her tablet. "May I offer you a pre-departure beverage? Perhaps champagne, or our signature elderflower spritz. Sparkling water with lime would be perfect." "Thank you," Alex replied. Sophia nodded. "Of course. And would you like a hot towel before we depart?" "Yes, that would be nice." She returned moments later with a crystal glass of sparkling water, precisely garnished with a perfect lime wedge, and a hot towel on a small porcelain dish. Her service was elegant and respectful, with no trace of the condescension he'd experienced at the gate. As Sophia moved on to the next passenger, Vanessa entered the first-class cabin. Her polished demeanor was back in place, her smile as wide and artificial as it had been at the gate. She moved through the aisle, her eyes scanning the passengers. When her gaze fell on Alex, it was for only a fraction of a second, but he saw a flicker of annoyance, a tightening around her mouth before she moved on. She was a master of the microaggression, the small, almost imperceptible acts of disrespect that could be so easily denied. She greeted the older couple from the gate with excessive warmth, fussing over their comfort, before completely bypassing Alex's suite to attend to a businessman further down the cabin. The man in 3B, whose name Alex would later learn was Judge Thomas Bennett, observed this with a slight narrowing of his eyes. He was in his mid-60s with silver hair and the dignified bearing of someone accustomed to authority. When Vanessa moved away, he caught Alex's eye again and gave a small knowing nod. Michael, meanwhile, continued his own rounds. His name tag identified him as the cabin service director, the lead flight attendant for the premium cabins. He paused at Alex's suite. "Everything comfortable for you, Sir Michael?" asked, his smile genuine. "Yes, thank you." "It's great," Alex replied. "Excellent. My name is Michael. Sophia, Vanessa, and I will be your primary flight attendants for this cabin on our way to Geneva. If there's anything at all you need, please don't hesitate to ask." Just then, Vanessa passed by again. She overheard the exchange and chimed in, her voice cloying. "Yes, anything at all within reason, of course." She gave Alex a look that seemed to size him up, as if expecting him to ask for something outrageous. Michael shifted uncomfortably, a brief look of apology flashing in his eyes before he moved on to the next passenger. Alex noted the interaction. Michael was not an ally, not yet. He was a bystander, uncomfortable with Vanessa's attitude but unwilling to challenge it. Once out of earshot, Michael pulled Vanessa aside in the galley. "What are you doing?" he whispered urgently. That comment was unnecessary. "What comment?" Vanessa replied innocently. "I was just clarifying our service parameters. No, you were singling him out. Just like at the gate." Michael had witnessed part of the boarding interaction while preparing the cabin. Vanessa's expression hardened. "Look, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I know when someone doesn't belong, and trust me, that kid is out of place here." "That's not your call to make," Michael countered. "He has a valid ticket. He deserves the same service as everyone else." "You're too soft, Michael," Vanessa scoffed. "People take advantage when you don't maintain standards. Standards of service, yes. Not standards of who belongs based on how they look." Michael's frustration was evident, but his voice remained low. Vanessa shrugged. "You'll learn." She grabbed a tray of welcome drinks and walked away, effectively ending the conversation. Michael hesitated, then returned to his duties, his discomfort visible in the tension of his shoulders. He had challenged her, but not forcefully enough to change anything. Alex glanced over at Judge Bennett, who was being offered a newspaper by Sophia. The judge declined with a gracious smile, lifting his tablet to indicate he had his reading material digitized. When Sophia moved away, the judge caught Alex's eye once more, this time with a slight shake of his head, a subtle indication that he hadn't missed Vanessa's tone. The flight took off smoothly, ascending into the deepening twilight over the Atlantic. Alex watched through his window as the lights of New York City shrank beneath them, a glittering constellation giving way to the vast darkness of the ocean. As the aircraft leveled off, he reclined his seat slightly, took out his tablet, and began to read. But a part of his mind remained alert, observing, documenting. Not out of vindictiveness, but from a place of measured assessment. Once they reached cruising altitude, the ballet of first-class service began. Hot towels were distributed, menus were presented, and drink orders were taken. Sophia handled the forward section of the cabin while Michael took the aft where Alex was seated. Yet Vanessa seemed to make a point of inserting herself into Michael's territory whenever she passed by Alex's suite. "Our dinner service will begin shortly," Michael informed Alex, handing him an elegantly printed menu. "Would you care for something to drink while you decide?" "Just another sparkling water, please," Alex replied. Michael nodded and moved on to Judge Bennett. Moments later, Sophia delivered Alex's water with a friendly smile before continuing her service routine. Everything was proceeding with the clockwork precision that Skyline Airlines was known for. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, creating a more intimate atmosphere as the meal service began. The senior passengers were served first, a standard protocol that Alex understood and respected. Michael approached his suite to take his dinner order. "I'll have the seared salmon, please," Alex said to Michael. Vanessa, passing by with a tray of appetizers, paused in the aisle. She let out a little sigh, just loud enough for Alex to hear. "The salmon is a very popular choice tonight," she said to no one in particular. "Hopefully we'll have enough." It was a subtle dig, another insinuation that he was somehow taking something that wasn't meant for him. Michael's face flushed slightly, and he quickly reassured Alex. "Don't you worry, sir. Your choice is locked in. We always provision for every passenger's first choice in this cabin." As Michael moved away, Vanessa lingered. "Perhaps you'd like to consider the chicken instead. It's equally delightful." Alex met her gaze directly. "I'm quite set on the salmon, thank you." She maintained her artificial smile. "As you wish." But as she turned away, he heard her mutter under her breath, "So entitled." Michael, who had overheard, stepped back toward Vanessa and whispered something in her ear. She looked annoyed but moved on to another passenger. Judge Bennett, who had witnessed the exchange, leaned slightly across the aisle. "Persistent, isn't she?" he remarked quietly. "Quite?" Alex agreed. "Thomas Bennett," the judge said, extending his hand across the aisle. "Alex Wilson," Alex replied, shaking it. A flash of recognition passed across Judge Bennett's face at the surname, but he made no immediate comment on it. Instead, he said, "I don't typically involve myself in others' business, but that interaction at the gate was remarkably inappropriate." You noticed that Alex asked. "I've spent 40 years on the federal bench observing human behavior," the judge replied. "Discrimination rarely announces itself with a bullhorn these days. It whispers in loaded phrases and manifests in small inequities. I've seen it in my courtroom too often to miss it." From a few rows up, a passenger in his 40s turned around to glance at their conversation, his expression disapproving. "Some of us are trying to relax," he said pointedly. Judge Bennett raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. I don't recall the gentleman in 4C expressing similar concerns when the couple in 1A and 1B were discussing their vineyard tour rather loudly for 20 minutes. The passenger in 4C reddened slightly and turned back around. The judge gave Alex a knowing look. "Another data point for your collection, I suspect. You noticed I was documenting." Alex observed. "Smart strategy. In my experience, organizations respond to evidence, not emotions. Whatever you decide to do with what you're observing, having a clear record will serve you well." When the appetizers arrived, Sophia served Alex a beautifully presented plate of seared scallops with a delicate saffron sauce. "Enjoy, Mr. Wilson," she said pleasantly. Throughout the cabin, the other flight attendants were providing attentive, personalized service. Michael checked on each passenger regularly, making sure wine glasses were refilled and needs were met. Vanessa focused her attention on the passengers at the front of the cabin, particularly the older couple and a middle-aged businessman, lavishing them with extra care and frequent check-ins. An hour into the flight, Alex was watching a movie when his drink, the sparkling water he'd been nursing, sat empty. He pressed the call button. After a few moments, Vanessa appeared at his door, her expression impatient. "Yes," she asked, foregoing any form of polite address. "Could I please have another water?" Alex requested politely. She stared at the empty glass. "You can see we're in the middle of a dinner service. I'll get to it when I can." She turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Alex sat back stunned by the sheer rudeness. He watched as she walked 10 feet to the galley, poured a glass of champagne for the passenger in seat 1A, and delivered it with a dazzling smile and a flourish. 10 minutes passed, then 15. His call light remained illuminated, a small, ignored beacon. From across the aisle, Judge Bennett watched with growing disapproval, making notes on his tablet occasionally. A woman in seat 1D glanced back at the ignored call light, then at the attentive service being provided to other passengers, her expression thoughtful. Finally, Michael, noticing the light on his way back from the galley, hurried over. "Sir, I am so sorry for the wait. What can I get for you?" Michael looked genuinely distressed. "Just a water when you have a moment," Alex said calmly. Of course. Right away. Michael looked flustered and shot a quick, anxious glance towards the galley where Vanessa was chatting with the pilot who had come out for a break. He returned in less than 30 seconds with the water and a small bowl of warm nuts. My apologies again for the delay. Alex gave him a small, appreciative nod. Thank you, Michael. When Michael returned to the galley, he confronted Vanessa more directly. You can't just ignore a call button for 15 minutes. That's basic service. I was busy, she replied dismissively, not too busy to serve 1A champagne immediately after Michael countered his voice, quiet but firm. This isn't acceptable, Vanessa. If you have an issue with a passenger, you need to set it aside or ask one of us to handle it. Are you telling me how to do my job? She challenged. I'm reminding you what our job is, Michael replied. And it's not to decide who deserves service based on personal judgment. Sophia, who had overheard, gave Michael a small nod of support. Vanessa noticed and rolled her eyes. Fine. You two can coddle the charity case if you want. I have actual first-class passengers to attend to. She walked away, leaving Michael and Sophia exchanging concerned glances. As Alex opened the Notes app on his phone and began to type. Date, August 4th, 2025. Flight, SL-220. JFK, GVA. Personnel, FA, Vanessa Powell. CSD, Michael Garcia. FA, Sofia Rodriguez. Incident 1. Boarding gate 47, approx. 1845, EST. F.A. Powell expressed disbelief at my first-class ticket. Stated, I think you've made a wrong turn, and, did you win a competition? Laughed at ticket. Incident 2, approx 2030. EST. During pre-dinner service, F.A. Powell implied I was taking a meal choice salmon that might be needed for other passengers. Suggested I order chicken instead with comment, so entitled, when I declined. Incident 3, approx to 21:15. EST. Ignored call button for over 15 minutes for a water refill request. Served other passengers during this time. Request fulfilled by CSD Garcia, who apologized for the delay. Alex was meticulous, listing times, specific quotes, and the names of the personnel involved. He even noted the presence of witnesses passenger in 3B. Thomas Bennett observed incidents 1, 2, and 3 showing visible disapproval. Passenger in 1D observed incident 3. This was no longer about his feelings or a personal insult. This was data. It was evidence of a breakdown in service, a failure of the values his father had championed when he founded Skyline Airlines. Every passenger from the last row of economy to the front seat of first is our guest. Treat them with dignity. Vanessa wasn't just being rude to him. She was actively undermining the very foundation of the company brand. This pattern continued for the next few hours. Small requests met with Vanessa's pointed delays and dismissive attitude, often corrected by a harried and apologetic Michael. She forgot to clear Alex's dinner tray until well after everyone else's had been collected. She spoke to the passengers around him with cheerful familiarity, but addressed him only with curt monosyllabic questions. Done? She asked when she finally came to collect his tray. Not, did you enjoy your meal, or may I clear this for you, as she had asked other passengers. Alex wasn't angry anymore. He was something else, fascinated. He was witnessing a case study in prejudice. Vanessa's behavior wasn't just about race. It was intertwined with class and entitlement. In her mind, the first-class cabin was a sanctuary for a certain type of person, and he did not fit the profile. His very presence was an affront to her sense of order. Around the cabin, other passengers were beginning to notice the pattern. An elderly woman in 5A frowned as she observed Vanessa bypass Alex's suite during the snack service. The businessman in 4C, who had earlier complained about Alex's conversation with Judge Bennett, now watched with a mixture of discomfort and perhaps a dawning recognition of his own complicity. A young couple in the center suites whispered to each other occasionally, glancing at Alex with sympathy. Not everyone noticed or cared. Several passengers were absorbed in movies or sleeping. but a growing subset of the cabin had become unwitting witnesses to what was unfolding. Michael became increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. During a quiet moment in the galley, he confided in Sophia. "I should say something more directly," he admitted. "This isn't right." "It's tricky," Sophia replied. "She has seniority, and you know how management usually sides with experience. Seniority doesn't give her the right to treat passengers differently," Michael argued. "I've seen her do this before with other passengers who don't fit her idea of first class. Usually not this blatantly, but the pattern is clear." "What happened the last time you reported similar concerns?" Sophia asked. Michael's expression darkened. "They said there was insufficient evidence of a pattern. Just isolated incidents that could be explained by miscommunication or service pressures. And that's why documentation matters," Sophia said pointedly. "If more of us spoke up consistently with specific examples, maybe something would change." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. I'm going to be more direct with her. And if that doesn't work, I'll document everything for a formal report." He continued to do his best to compensate for Vanessa's behavior, offering Alex extra attention whenever possible. It created an odd dynamic where Alex received either the worst or the best service on the aircraft with little middle ground. Alex continued to document each incident. Incident 4, approx. 22:20 EST. Dinner tray left at my seat for approximately 25 minutes after all other passengers in vicinity were cleared. Cleared by CSD Garcia. Incident 5, approx. 23:05 EST. During turn-down service, F.A. Powell skipped my suite entirely. When I requested turn-down service via call button, she replied, "I thought young people preferred to do things for themselves." Service eventually provided by F.A. Rodriguez, who apologized. Incident 6, approx. 23:40 EST. Overheard F.A. Powell telling passenger in 1D that they were her favorite kind of first-class passenger while glancing in my direction. Judge Bennett in 3B was becoming increasingly aware of the situation. The distinguished gentleman had been observing the interactions with a look of growing disapproval. After the turn-down service incident, he caught Alex's glance and gave him a subtle, sympathetic shake of his head. During a quiet moment when most passengers were either watching movies or beginning to sleep, Judge Bennett leaned slightly across the aisle. "Young man," he said in a low voice, "I couldn't help but notice the inconsistency in service you're receiving." Alex nodded slightly. "Yes, sir. It's been interesting to observe. I admire your composure," the judge continued. "Most people would have made a scene by now. I find documentation more effective than confrontation," Alex replied. Judge Bennett's eyes flickered to Alex's tablet where his detailed notes were visible. A small smile of approval crossed his face. "Smart. Very smart." He extended his hand across the aisle. "Thomas Bennett." "Alex Wilson." Alex replied, shaking the offered hand. "Wilson," Judge Bennett repeated thoughtfully. "Any relation to James Wilson by chance?" Alex hesitated, then nodded slightly. "He's my father." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see." He leaned back in his seat, processing this information. "You know, I've had the privilege of meeting your father several times. We served together on a commerce commission about 15 years ago." I didn't know that, Alex said, genuinely surprised. "He's a remarkable man," Judge Bennett continued, "particularly given the obstacles he faced building his company." "You know about that?" Alex asked. "Some," the judge replied. "Enough to understand why he might have raised a son who responds to disrespect with such methodical poise rather than impulsive reaction." Alex smiled slightly. "He's always said that true character is revealed in how you treat people when you have nothing to gain from them. And true leadership is shown in how you respond when disrespected," Judge Bennett completed the saying. "Yes, that sounds like James." He studied Alex for a moment. "Have you considered what you'll do with your observations?" I'm still deciding, Alex admitted. I don't want this to just be about one flight attendant behaving poorly. There's something larger at work here. Perceptive Judge Bennett nodded. In my years on the bench, I've seen how individual incidents often reveal wider patterns within organizations. What behaviors are tolerated, what complaints are dismissed, what problems are considered too inconvenient to address. Exactly, Alex agreed. And that's what I'm trying to understand. Well, should you need an additional witness statement at any point, I'd be happy to provide one, the judge offered. I've been flying with Skyline for 20 years, and I've never seen such a clear case of, shall we say, selective service. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. As they spoke, Vanessa walked by, her eyes narrowing slightly at their interaction. She paused at Judge Bennett's suite. Is everything all right, Judge Bennett? Can I get you anything? No, thank you, Ms. Powell. Just having a pleasant conversation with my fellow passenger. His tone was polite but cool. Vanessa's eyes darted to Alex, then back to the judge. Well, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. We want our premium passengers to have the very best experience. The emphasis on premium was subtle but unmistakable. I'm sure you do. Judge Bennett replied, his gaze steady and evaluating. I'm sure you do. After Vanessa moved away, the judge looked at Alex with a raised eyebrow. Adding that exchange to your notes. I presume? Alex nodded, already typing. Incident 7, he murmured. As the night progressed and most passengers began to sleep, Alex found himself unable to do the same. The documentation had become a mission not out of spite but out of a sense of professional integrity. His father had built this airline on principles of respect and dignity. What he was witnessing was a betrayal of those principles. At approximately 2:30 a.m. Eastern Time, as the aircraft cruised over the middle of the Atlantic, the smooth journey was interrupted. A sudden sharp jolt shook the aircraft, followed by a series of smaller bumps. The seatbelt sign pinged on, and the captain's calm, reassuring voice filled the cabin. Folks, we're just hitting a small patch of unexpected turbulence. Nothing to be concerned about, but for your safety, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Most passengers slept through it, but a nervous-looking woman in seat 4A let out a small gasp. Her name, Alex had overheard earlier, was Laura Johnson, a business executive traveling to a conference in Switzerland. She had mentioned to Sophia during boarding that she had a fear of flying, but managed it with meditation techniques. Vanessa, who was nearest to her, rolled her eyes almost imperceptibly before plastering on her service smile. It's just a few bumps, ma'am. Perfectly normal, she said, her tone more dismissive than reassuring. Ms. Johnson still looked panicked, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know it's irrational, but I can't help it. Well, there's nothing I can do about turbulence, Vanessa replied, already turning away. Just stay in your seat until the sign goes off. Alex, an aviation enthusiast since childhood, recognized the feel of the turbulence. It wasn't dangerous, just uncomfortable. He'd spent countless hours in simulators and on short-haul flights with his father's chief pilots. He knew the aircraft's response, the sound of the engines adjusting the subtle shifts in the airframe. Seeing Ms. Johnson's distress and Vanessa's dismissal, Alex considered intervening. He had techniques his father had taught him for explaining turbulence to nervous passengers. But before he could act, Michael appeared from the galley. Michael knelt by Ms. Johnson's seat. It can be a bit startling, can't it? He said softly. But I promise you this plane is designed to handle far worse. Think of it like a boat on a choppy sea. It feels dramatic, but the boat is perfectly safe. He placed a reassuring hand briefly on the armrest near hers. Can I get you a glass of water? Sometimes small sips can help regulate your breathing. His calm empathy worked instantly. Ms. Johnson's shoulders relaxed, and she gave him a grateful nod. That would be wonderful, thank you. Vanessa watched the exchange with a flicker of resentment, as if Michael's competence was a personal slight against her. She moved to the galley ostensibly to prepare for any service requests that might come from the turbulence wake-up. But Alex noticed her muttering something to Sophia, who looked uncomfortable with whatever was being said. Wasting time coddling them just encourages the drama, Vanessa was saying, just loudly enough for Alex to overhear. In my day, people handled their own anxieties without needing a therapy session from the crew. Sophia's response was too quiet to hear, but her expression suggested disagreement. There was a hierarchy at play that prevented her from challenging Vanessa directly, but her body language spoke volumes. The turbulence continued for about 20 minutes, enough to disturb the sleep of several passengers. Judge Bennett was among those awakened. He adjusted his seat to a more upright position and accepted a glass of water from Michael. "Everything okay over there?" the judge asked Alex, who was still awake and reading. "Yes, sir. Just some normal chop. Nothing to worry about." Judge Bennett nodded. "You seem to know a bit about aviation." Alex smiled slightly. "You could say it's in my blood. I imagine growing up with James Wilson as your father would immerse you in the world of aviation from an early age," the judge observed. "I still remember a case I presided over years ago involving airline safety regulations. Your father testified as an expert witness. His knowledge was encyclopedic, but what impressed me most was his unshakable commitment to passenger dignity regardless of ticket price. He believed that respect wasn't a luxury upgrade. He still says that Alex replied. It's been one of his core principles from the beginning, which makes what's happening now all the more ironic," Judge Bennett noted, glancing toward Vanessa, who was now making a perfunctory walk through the cabin. "I'd prefer if my identity stayed between us for now," Sir Alex said quietly. Judge Bennett nodded. "Of course. I admire your approach, young man. Most people in your position would have pulled rank immediately. That's not how my father taught me to handle situations like this," Alex replied. "He always says that true character is revealed in how you treat people when you have nothing to gain from them, and true leadership is shown in how you respond when disrespected." Wise words, the judge said. And from what I'm seeing, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. As the turbulence subsided and the seatbelt sign was switched off, Vanessa made a perfunctory walk through the cabin. "Everything all right here?" she asked, addressing the question generally to both Alex and Judge Bennett, though her eyes rested only on the latter. "I'm fine, thank you," the judge replied, then added pointedly. "And you? Mr. Wilson? Are you comfortable?" The direct inclusion of Alex in the conversation forced Vanessa to acknowledge him. Her smile tightened. "Yes. How are you doing?" "Sir." The hesitation before "sir" was slight but noticeable. "I'm well, thank you," Alex replied politely. As Vanessa moved away, Judge Bennett caught Alex's eye. "Add that to your list as well," he suggested quietly. The contrast in service levels during a moment of potential stress can be very telling. Alex nodded, making another note on his tablet. The documentation was becoming comprehensive, a clear pattern emerging not of isolated rudeness, but of consistent targeted behavior. "You mentioned earlier that you knew my father professionally," Alex said, wanting to learn more about the judge. "Yes, but our connection goes deeper than that." "Commerce Commission," Judge Bennett replied. "I've spent most of my career focused on civil rights cases. Your father once consulted me about discriminatory practices he'd observed in airport hiring. He was concerned that qualified minority candidates were being passed over for customer-facing positions because they didn't fit certain image expectations." "I didn't know that," Alex said. "It was about 15 years ago. He wanted to ensure Skyline's hiring practices were genuinely merit-based. Not many CEOs would have taken that initiative proactively." Judge Bennett looked thoughtful. "That's why I find it particularly troubling to see that despite his efforts at the top, discriminatory attitudes can still manifest in day-to-day service. It shows how persistent these problems are," Alex observed, "even in a company where the founder and CEO is explicitly committed to equality." "Precisely. Policy and culture are different animals. Policy can change with a memo. Culture requires constant vigilance. The judge glanced toward Vanessa, who was chatting amicably with a passenger in the front row. What you're experiencing is the gap between the two. Alex nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just about one rude flight attendant. It was about the distance between corporate values and frontline reality, a challenge that would one day be his to address when he stepped into his father's role. It was during the quiet lull after the turbulence with the cabin returned to its previous tranquility that Vanessa's curiosity, now a festering obsession, got the better of her again. She strolled down the aisle, feigning a check on the sleeping passengers. She paused once more at Alex's suite. He had his reading light on, the soft glow illuminating his face as he continued to document the flight's events on his tablet. Still awake, she asked. Her tone had shifted slightly. The overt hostility was gone, replaced by a kind of predatory curiosity. The information about Alex's booking had created a puzzle she couldn't solve, and it was clearly bothering her. Just reading Alex said, not looking up from his tablet. That corporate account your ticket was booked on, she began, dropping all pretense of subtlety. I'm just a stickler for the rules, you see. We have to be sure who's flying with us, security protocols and all. The name on the account is James Wilson. Is he your employer? Alex finally looked up at her, his expression unreadable. He could see the gears turning in her head. She was trying to connect the dots, a young black man, an exclusive corporate account, a powerful name. The narrative she had constructed in her mind, the charity case, the sponsored boy, was crumbling. But she hadn't yet grasped the reality. For a moment, Alex considered maintaining the ambiguity, letting her continue to speculate. But something in him, perhaps a desire to see if the truth would change her behavior, or perhaps simply a weariness with the game, made him decide to give her a single, simple truth. James Wilson is my father. The statement landed in the quiet cabin with the force of a physical blow. Vanessa froze, her professionally applied smile faltering, twitching at the corners. For a full 3 seconds, she just stared at him, her brain seeming to buffer, trying to process the information. Your father, she repeated, her voice a dry whisper. Alex simply nodded. Yes. Vanessa's mind raced. Wilson. She had seen the name on the passenger manifest, of course. Elias Wilson. But it hadn't clicked. Wilson was a common enough name. It couldn't be. It was just impossible. James Wilson, the legendary founder of Skyline Airlines, was a figure of almost mythical status within the company. A demanding but brilliant leader who had built an empire from scratch. He was known for his impromptu inspections and his zero-tolerance policy for anything that tarnished the airline's reputation. But She began, then stopped herself. I'm what Alex asked, his voice suddenly hard-edged. Vanessa realized she was on dangerous ground. You're so young, she said, attempting recovery. I didn't realize he had a son your age. He doesn't discuss his family much publicly, Alex replied, his tone neutral again. Security concerns. She tried to laugh it off, a brittle cracking sound. That's quite a coincidence. Wilson is such a common name. I don't imagine my own name. Alex said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He held her gaze unwavering. There was no hint of a lie in his eyes, only a profound, unnerving stillness. The seed of doubt planted by the founder's circle account designation now sprouted into a thorny vine of pure, unadulterated panic in Vanessa's gut. What if it was true? What if this quiet, unassuming teenager she had been tormenting for the past 5 hours was the heir to the entire Skyline empire? She thought back to every interaction, the condescending welcome at the gate, the laugh, the sarcastic comments about the salmon and his sponsor, the deliberate petty delays in service. Each memory was now a nail being driven into her own coffin. Her blood ran cold. The cabin, which had felt comfortably warm moments before, now seemed frigid. "Excuse me," she mumbled, turning abruptly and making a beeline for the galley, her confident stride now a panicked shuffle. Michael was there, wiping down a counter. He looked up, surprised by her sudden pale appearance. "Vanessa, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "The kid," Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. "The kid in 2A. Wilson." "What about him?" Michael asked, frowning. "I know he's been quiet, but he seems like a perfectly nice young man." "His name," Vanessa said, grabbing Michael's arm, her red nails digging into his sleeve. "It's Alexander Wilson. He just told me his father is James Wilson." Michael's face went from confusion to comprehension and then to absolute horror. The color drained from his cheeks. Unlike Vanessa, he made the connection instantly. He had been with the airline for 15 years. He had been to company-wide town halls where James Wilson had spoken. He'd seen pictures of the CEO with his family in the company's internal newsletter. The son was rarely photographed, fiercely protected from the public eye. But Michael remembered a picture from a charity event years ago. A younger, smaller version of the same quiet, observant face currently sitting in seat 2A. "Oh, Vanessa." Michael breathed, his voice barely audible. "Oh, no. What did you do?" The question hung in the air, a death knell for her career. The smug satisfaction she had felt, the petty power trip she had been on, all of it evaporated, replaced by a tidal wave of ice-cold dread. It wasn't remorse for her behavior. It wasn't a sudden realization about her own prejudice. It was the primal, gut-wrenching fear of getting caught. She stumbled back against the counter, her mind a frantic slideshow of her own actions. She hadn't just been rude to a passenger. She had insulted, humiliated, and harassed the son of the one man who held her entire professional life in the palm of his hand. "It can't be," she whispered. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not," Michael replied grimly. "James Wilson has a son named Alexander who would be about that age. It fits." "But he's—" Vanessa gestured vaguely, the unspoken prejudice hanging in the air between them. Michael's expression hardened. "Yes." "He's what?" "Exactly." Vanessa didn't finish the thought. The implication was clear enough. "You know I've stood by too many times when you've treated passengers differently based on how they look," Michael said, his voice low but firm. "I've tried to compensate to smooth things over. I've made excuses about your stress level or your experience. But this is inexcusable." "You don't understand?" Vanessa pleaded. "I was just maintaining standards. There are certain people who belong in first class, and certain people who—" "Stop," Michael cut her off. "Just stop. Listen to yourself. This isn't about standards. This is about prejudice, plain and simple." Sophia entered the galley, sensing the tension. "Everything okay?" "No," Michael replied before Vanessa could speak. "It's not. The flight still had 5 hours to go. 5 hours trapped in a metal tube 35,000 feet in the air with the living embodiment of her own ruin." The galley of a Boeing 777 is a small, confined space, but for Vanessa Powell it suddenly felt like a vast, empty void. The hum of the machinery, usually a comforting background noise, now sounded like a roaring in her ears. Michael stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning pity. "What do you mean? What did I do?" Vanessa hissed, her voice a frantic whisper. She was defensive, terrified. "I didn't do anything. I treated him like any other passenger." Michael just looked at her, his expression saying everything. He had been there. He had seen it all, the condescending tone, the ignored call light, the snide remarks. He had been her unwilling audience, compensating for her behavior throughout the flight. "Vanessa," he said, his voice low and serious, "I was right there. You need to go and apologize to him right now. Maybe you can fix this. Fix it. Vanessa's laugh was sharp and hysterical. How do I fix it? Go up to him and say, "Sorry I treated you like dirt. I didn't realize your father was a billionaire who could fire me with a single text message. He'll see right through it. It's better than doing nothing," Michael insisted. "Go be the best flight attendant he has ever seen for the rest of this flight. Maybe he won't say anything." The hope in Michael's voice was faint, but it was all Vanessa had. The idea of the quiet young man simply letting it all slide was a fantasy. She had seen his eyes. They weren't angry or vengeful. They were calm, observant, and deeply intelligent. It was the look of someone who doesn't forget. Sophia, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "Vanessa, I've only been flying with you for 6 months, but I've seen how you treat certain passengers differently. I've never said anything because you have seniority, and frankly, I was afraid of making waves as a new hire. But Michael's right. This has gone beyond unprofessional into something much worse." "Don't lecture me," Vanessa snapped. "You have no idea what this industry was like before you showed up with your perfect smile and your liberal arts degree." "This isn't about the industry," Sophia replied calmly. This is about basic human respect." Vanessa felt cornered, attacked from all sides. "I've given everything to this airline 22 years of my life. I've missed my son's birthdays, my anniversary dinners, and that gives you the right to decide who deserves respect based on how they look." Michael interrupted. "That's not how it works, Vanessa. That's never how it worked." Panic gave way to a desperate, fumbling attempt at damage control. Her mind, which minutes before had been filled with petty grievances, was now working furiously trying to construct a new reality, a new narrative where she was the victim of a misunderstanding. She took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and forced the professional mask back onto her face. It felt heavy, like a lead shield. "You're right," she said, her voice tight. "You're right. Service. Impeccable service." She strode out of the galley, her movements stiff and robotic. Her first stop was Alex's suite. She approached with a wide, trembling smile that looked more like a grimace. "Mr. Wilson?" She began, her voice several octaves higher than usual. "I was just thinking, you've been reading for so long your eyes must be tired. Could I bring you a hot towel or perhaps a snack? We have a lovely cheese plate or some Belgian chocolates." Alex looked up from his book. He saw the sweat beading on her upper lip. He saw the frantic, desperate energy in her eyes. He saw the terror masquerading as kindness. It was in its own way more insulting than her earlier contempt. "No, thank you, Vanessa," he said, his voice perfectly level. He used her first name deliberately, a subtle reminder that he knew exactly who she was. Her smile faltered. "Of course. Well, if you change your mind anything at all, I think I'll try to get some rest now," Alex interrupted gently but firmly. She backed away from his suite as if it were radioactive. "Of course. Rest well, Mr. Wilson." As she retreated, Alex caught Judge Bennett's eye. The older man had been watching the exchange with interest. He gave Alex a knowing look, one eyebrow raised in silent question. Alex merely shook his head slightly and returned to his book. For the next several hours, Vanessa Powell became a caricature of a perfect flight attendant. She was a whirlwind of frantic, obsequious activity, all of it centered on seat 2A. She hovered near Alex's suite, ready to pounce at the slightest sign of a need. She offered him drinks he didn't want, snacks he didn't ask for, and blankets he didn't need. Every 10 minutes, she would appear with a fresh bottle of sparkling water just to make sure it stays chilled, Mr. Wilson. Alex simply continued to read politely, declining each offer. His calm, quiet refusals were more unnerving to her than any outburst would have been. He wasn't giving her an opportunity to fix anything. He was simply not engaging. He had already seen who she was. This frantic performance was meaningless. The other passengers in first class began to notice. Judge Bennett watched Vanessa's bizarre targeted attention with a raised eyebrow. He had seen her earlier rudeness, and now saw this cloying, desperate overcompensation. It was obvious that something had changed, that the flight attendant had realized she'd made a catastrophic error. A middle-aged woman in 1D who had been observing the situation throughout the flight caught Alex's eye at one point and gave him a small, sympathetic smile. "Quite a performance," she mouthed silently, nodding toward Vanessa. Alex returned a slight smile but said nothing. He was maintaining his role as the observer, not the provocateur. Even the businessman in 4C who had earlier complained about Alex's conversation with the judge now watched the proceedings with uncomfortable awareness. There was a shift in the cabin's atmosphere, a collective recognition that something significant was unfolding, even if most passengers didn't know exactly what. Vanessa's panic was a palpable thing. With every polite "no thank you" from Alex, her internal terror grew. She replayed the scene at the gate over and over. "I think you've made a wrong turn." The words haunted her. How could she have been so stupid, so arrogant? She had built her identity on being able to size people up to know who belonged and who didn't. Her entire worldview, her sense of superiority had been shattered. She hadn't been perceptive. She had been a blind, blundering fool. She tried to talk to Michael again in the galley, looking for reassurance. "He's not saying anything," she whispered, wringing her hands. "He's just reading." Maybe it's a good sign, Michael suggested, but his eyes said otherwise. "You don't understand," Vanessa said, her voice breaking. "I laughed at his ticket. I laughed at James Wilson's son." To his face. Michael winced. "That's not good." "What do I do?" Vanessa pleaded. "Tell me what to do. Be professional. Do your job. That's all you can do right now," Michael replied, his tone suggesting he knew it was too little too late. As Vanessa walked away, Sophia approached Michael, concern etched on her face. "What's going on with her?" she whispered. "She's acting bizarre," Michael sighed. "The passenger in 2A. That's Alexander Wilson, James Wilson's son." Sophia's eyes widened. The James Wilson, our founder. The one and only. And Vanessa has been less than welcoming to him. Oh no. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. She was horrible to him at the gate. I overheard her laughing about some kid who didn't belong in first class when we were preparing for boarding. Michael closed his eyes briefly. "It gets worse. She's been targeting him the entire flight, ignoring his call button, making comments the works. And he's been documenting it all." Sophia leaned against the galley wall, her face pale. "She's done, isn't she?" "I think we all know the answer to that," Michael replied softly. "And the tragedy is it shouldn't have taken the CEO's son being mistreated to make us confront this. How many other passengers has she done this to over the years?" Sophia nodded soberly. "Too many, I suspect. And most of them probably didn't have the power to do anything about it." "That's what makes this different," Michael said. "For once, she picked the wrong person to discriminate against. Someone who can actually change things." In his suite, Alex continued his meticulous documentation, adding Vanessa's sudden change in behavior to his notes. Approx. 3:15 EST. After revealing my identity, F.A. Powell's behavior changed dramatically. Excessive attention offering unsolicited services, visible anxiety. Contrast with previous service pattern indicates knowledge of my identity is driving current behavior, not professional standards or genuine hospitality. Judge Bennett caught his attention with a small gesture. When Alex looked over, the judge mouthed silently, "Need any help?" Alex shook his head slightly and mouthed back, "Just watching." The judge nodded, a small smile of approval on his face. He seemed to understand exactly what Alex was doing, allowing events to unfold naturally, documenting rather than intervening. It was the approach of someone who understood how to build an irrefutable case. As the flight began its initial descent towards Geneva, the captain made an announcement about preparing the cabin for landing. The familiar procedures felt alien to Vanessa. Her hands shook as she collected the last of the service items. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Landing wasn't an end. It was a beginning. The beginning of the consequences. She made one last desperate attempt. As she passed Alex's suite to do a final seatbelt check, she leaned in. "Mr. Wilson," she whispered, her voice cracking. I feel as though we may have gotten off on the wrong foot earlier today. I was stressed. The gate was chaotic. I truly hope I didn't cause you any offense." It was a weak, self-serving apology, full of excuses. Alex finally put down his tablet. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers for a long moment. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked disappointed. "The offense, Vanessa," he said, his voice low and clear, "was not about my feelings. It was about your conduct. An employee of this airline should treat every passenger with dignity, not just the ones you think are important." He then turned and looked out the window at the snow-capped peaks of the Alps appearing through the clouds. He had said all he needed to say. The conversation was over. Vanessa stood frozen in the aisle, his words echoing in her ears. He had confirmed her worst fears. He hadn't seen her actions as a personal slight to be forgiven. He had seen them as a professional failure to be corrected. She wasn't dealing with a spoiled rich kid who wanted an apology. She was dealing with the son of the man who wrote the rulebook she had so spectacularly broken. She stumbled back to her jump seat and strapped herself in for landing. As the plane touched down on the tarmac in Geneva, the smooth landing felt like a violent crash to Vanessa. Her world was coming down around her. The aircraft taxied towards the terminal with a low whine, the sprawling expanse of Geneva Airport coming into view. For the passengers, it was the end of a long journey. For Vanessa Powell, it felt like the final moments of a slow, agonizing walk to the gallows. Her mind was a blank slate of fear. She went through the post-landing procedures on autopilot, her hands moving but her mind elsewhere. Her smile was gone, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped mask of dread. When the seatbelt sign switched off, the familiar chime sounded like a death knell. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived in Geneva," Michael announced over the intercom, his voice professional but strained. He avoided looking at Vanessa. "On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you for flying with Skyline Airlines." The first-class passengers began to gather their belongings. Alex was in no rush. He stood up stretched and calmly retrieved his single carry-on bag from the overhead compartment. He slid the door to his suite open and stepped into the aisle, making brief, polite eye contact with Judge Bennett from 3B. "Have a good trip," Judge Bennett said to him, his voice warm. He gave Alex a look that was both knowing and supportive. "And for what it's worth, you handled that with remarkable grace." "Thank you, sir." "You as well," Alex replied, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. "As I mentioned, I served with your father on that Commerce Commission," the judge continued in a low voice. "But what I didn't tell you is that I was also the presiding judge in the discrimination case he filed against Transglobal Airways 20 years ago." Alex's eyes widened slightly. "The gate incident that made him start Skyline?" Judge Bennett nodded. "The very one. Your father wasn't just denied a seat. He was publicly humiliated, accused of having a fraudulent ticket, and physically removed from the gate. He could have settled for monetary compensation, but he insisted on structural changes. When those weren't forthcoming, he decided to build his own airline with dignity as its foundation. I knew parts of that story, but not all the details," Alex admitted. "He didn't want you to grow up in the shadow of that humiliation," the judge explained. "He wanted you to form your own understanding of the world, but I suspect he'd be proud of how you've handled yourself today. You've shown the same commitment to dignity without vengeance that he did." Their conversation was interrupted as Vanessa approached to begin the deplaning process. She stood near the exit to bid farewell to the passengers, her face a rigid mask of professionalism. She tried to catch Alex's eye as he approached, perhaps to offer one last pleading look, but he didn't glance her way. He simply walked past her, his gaze fixed on the jet bridge ahead as if she were nothing more than a part of the cabin fixtures. She and Michael were required to stand at the doorway until all first-class passengers had deplaned. The silence between them was heavy and suffocating. As the last passenger disappeared up the jet bridge, Michael finally spoke. "Good luck, Vanessa," he whispered, and it sounded like a genuine, sad farewell. Vanessa felt a surge of bitter resentment. Why was he pitying her? This was all his fault somehow. If he had just done his job better, maybe she wouldn't have been so stressed. The irrational thought flared and died in an instant, leaving only the cold ash of her own culpability. "Don't act like you're innocent in this," she hissed. "You could have warned me who he was." Michael looked genuinely stunned. "Warned you? So you could have treated him well because of who his father is, instead of treating him well because that's our job." "Do you even hear yourself?" Vanessa fell silent, the truth of his words hitting her with unexpected force. "I tried to warn you," Michael continued, his voice low but intense. "Not about who he was, but about how you were behaving. Multiple times. I pulled you aside in the galley after boarding. I spoke to you again after you ignored his call button. I've been trying to get you to see what you were doing for years, Vanessa. This isn't new behavior for you." "What are you talking about?" she demanded. But there was a defensive quaver in her voice. "The woman in 5C last month who you said must be in the wrong cabin because she was wearing traditional African clothing. The elderly Asian couple in 2D and 2F who you forgot to serve until I reminded you. The Hispanic executive in 1A who you insisted must have a companion pass rather than a paid ticket." Michael's voice was steady, relentless. "I've seen it all, Vanessa. I just didn't have the courage to formally report it. That's on me, and I'll have to live with that failure." Vanessa stared at him, her face a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Had it really been that obvious? Had she really been that person? Standard procedure required the cabin crew to do a walkthrough of the aircraft before disembarking themselves. As Vanessa walked through the now empty first-class cabin, she saw Alex's seat 2A. It was neat the blanket folded, the pillow plumped. The only thing out of place was a discarded water bottle. It was a pristine, silent testament to the young man who had sat there quietly observing and documenting her downfall. After completing their checks, the crew finally disembarked. They stepped out of the aircraft and into the sterile environment of the Geneva airport terminal, and that's when Vanessa saw him. Waiting just beyond the jet bridge, standing with an air of quiet authority, was a woman in a sharply tailored charcoal suit. She was tall, with auburn hair and a serious expression. She stood next to Alex, who was speaking to her in a low voice. As the crew approached, the woman in the suit looked up. Her eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the pilots and then settled on the cabin crew. She singled out Vanessa and Michael instantly. Alex concluded his quiet conversation. The woman in the suit nodded, then turned her full attention to the crew. "Captain, an excellent flight as always," she said, her voice resonant and commanding. She then looked directly at Vanessa, and her gaze was like ice. "Ms. Powell, Mr. Garcia, I am Victoria Hammond, Director of European Operations for Skyline Airlines." Vanessa's heart stopped. This was not ground staff. This was senior management. She was here in person. Victoria Hammond was here in person. "Ms. Hammond." Michael stammered, his face pale. "Ms." Hammond gave Michael a brief, almost sympathetic nod before her icy gaze returned to Vanessa. She gestured towards Alex. "Mr. Wilson has just given me a brief overview of his flight experience." The formal corporate language was more terrifying than any shouting could have been. An overview of his flight experience. "He has informed me," Ms. Hammond continued, her voice dropping slightly, becoming even more chilling, "that the service in the first-class cabin was in some respects profoundly disappointing and failed to meet the standards of this airline." Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, to say something, anything, but no words came out. Her throat was tight with panic. Ms. Hammond held up a hand, silencing her before she could even begin. Mr. Wilson has also submitted via his phone a detailed timestamp PED log of several specific incidents. This log has already been forwarded to me, to our head of in-flight services, and to human resources. Furthermore, another passenger, a Judge Thomas Bennett in seat 3B, who happens to be one of our most loyal Platinum tier flyers, has already sent an unsolicited email to his executive liaison praising Mr. Garcia's service, while simultaneously expressing his utter disgust at his words. Every sentence was a hammer blow, dismantling any possible defense she could mount. A detailed log from Alex, a corroborating complaint from a VIP passenger, praise for her colleague that only highlighted her own failures. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. Alex stood by his expression neutral. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smiling. He was simply watching the system he had set in motion play out. He had gathered the data, submitted the report, and now the corporate machine was doing its work. Ms. Powell. Ms. Hammond said, her voice now devoid of all emotion. There will be a formal investigation, of course, but based on this initial and frankly damning evidence, you are suspended from all duties effective immediately. A car is waiting to take you to a hotel. You will be contacted by HR in the morning to arrange your flight back to New York in economy class. Please hand your crew ID to me. The final insult economy class was delivered with surgical precision. It was a clear, brutal message. You are no longer one of us. Vanessa's hands trembled so violently she could barely unclip the ID from her uniform. The plastic card felt slick with her sweat. She held it out to Ms. Hammond, her eyes pleading. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. Ms. Hammond took the ID without touching her fingers. She glanced at it, then pocketed it. She then addressed Michael. Mr. Garcia, Mr. Peterson's email praised your professionalism under difficult circumstances. We will discuss this further, but for now, thank you for upholding our standards. You may proceed with the rest of the crew. Michael gave Vanessa one last sorrowful look and then hurried away, joining the pilots who were trying very hard to pretend they hadn't heard the entire exchange. Sophia lingered a moment longer. I should have said something sooner, she said quietly to Michael as they walked away. I saw what was happening and stayed silent. We all did, Michael replied. That's the real problem here. Vanessa was left standing alone facing Ms. Hammond and Alex. The bustling airport seemed to fade into a blur around her. Ms. Hammond turned to Alex. Alex, your car is waiting downstairs. Your father sends his regards and looks forward to your call this evening. Thank you, Victoria, Alex said simply. He then looked at Vanessa, his gaze no longer holding disappointment but a kind of weary finality. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and then turned and walked away with Miss Hammond, leaving Vanessa standing alone under the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal, the silence of her ruined career deafening. As he walked away, Alex felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was no satisfaction in watching Vanessa's humiliation, only a quiet resolve that what had happened was necessary, not as punishment, but as the first step toward something better. He had witnessed not just one person's failure, but a gap in the system. His father had built a gap between stated values and lived reality. And in that moment, he began to see how he might help bridge it. The office was sterile and impersonal, a symphony in beige and brushed steel. It was a temporary workspace used by visiting executives at the Geneva airport, and its transient nature seemed to mock the permanence of Vanessa's situation. She sat in a chair that felt too firm, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. The coffee on the table in front of her was untouched, its aroma sickeningly sweet. Across the polished table sat Victoria Hammond and a woman who had introduced herself via video conference from New York as Catherine Blackwell, the Vice President of Human Resources. Her image was sharp on the large screen, her expression severe and impassive. Alex was not there. His absence was a statement in itself. His personal feelings were irrelevant to this process. This was not a personal dispute. It was a corporate proceeding. Ms. Powell, Catherine Blackwell, began, her voice crisp and clear through the speakers. We have the preliminary report in front of us. It includes the log submitted by Mr. Wilson, the complaint from passenger Judge Thomas Bennett, and a preliminary statement from flight attendant Michael Garcia, which was taken this morning. Vanessa flinched at the mention of Michael's name, the final betrayal. He had given a statement. She felt a surge of indignation, but it was quickly extinguished by a wave of helplessness. What else could he have done for her? His statement, she was sure, would be a carefully worded factual account of what he witnessed. It would be damning. I'd like to give you an opportunity to provide your side of the story. Catherine continued, a formality that held no promise of salvation. Vanessa swallowed hard, her throat dry. It was a misunderstanding. She began the word sounding weak and hollow even to her own ears. The gate was incredibly busy. I was under a lot of stress. I may have been abrupt, but I never intended to cause offense. Victoria Hammond, who had been silent until now, steepled her fingers and leaned forward slightly. Vanessa, she said, using her first name in a way that felt like a doctor addressing a terminal patient. Let's be very clear. The report doesn't allege abruptness. It details a consistent pattern of targeted unprofessional conduct over a 10-hour period. It began with a challenge to a passenger's right to be in the first-class line. She picked up a tablet and read from it. Oh, honey, I think you've made a wrong turn. Did you win a competition? These are your words, are they not? Vanessa's face burned with shame. Hearing them repeated in this cold, sterile room was a new kind of humiliation. I don't remember the exact words, but it was meant as a joke, a bit of banter. A joke. Catherine Blackwell's voice cut in from the screen sharp as glass. Judge Bennett, a passenger with no connection to Mr. Wilson, did not perceive it as a joke. He called it a disgusting display of condescension. Flight attendant Garcia, in his statement, described your tone as openly contemptuous. Mr. Wilson, in his log, noted that you laughed at his ticket. Do you deny laughing, Ms. Powell? It was just a small chuckle, she stammered. He looked so young. I was just surprised, that's all. Surprised by what exactly? Victoria Hammond asked, her eyes narrowing. Skyline Airlines is a global carrier. We fly people of all ages, all nationalities, all races, in all of our cabins. What precisely was so surprising about a young black man holding a first-class ticket that it warranted laughter? The question hung in the air, a direct and unanswerable indictment of her prejudice. She had no answer that wouldn't condemn her completely. She had laughed because he didn't fit her mental image of a first-class passenger. She had laughed because in her twisted worldview he didn't belong. A memory flashed through her mind. Her own son's face, devastated after receiving his third college rejection letter. Mom, it's not fair, he had cried. They're just letting in minorities to fill quotas. Kids with worse grades than mine are getting accepted because of their skin color. She had comforted him, reinforced his narrative, feeding his sense of victimhood and entitlement, rather than encouraging him to work harder or consider how his essays and extracurriculars compared to others. Now facing the consequences of her own prejudice, she wondered what lessons she had really taught him. She slumped in her chair, the fight draining out of her. I made a mistake, she whispered. You made a series of choices, Catherine Blackwell corrected her coldly. You chose to ignore a call light for 15 minutes. You chose to make insinuating remarks about the passenger having a sponsor. You chose to use your access to the passenger manifest to investigate the source of his ticket payment, a severe breach of passenger privacy. That was the charge that sealed it. It wasn't just about rudeness anymore. It was a flagrant violation of company policy and data privacy laws. This company, Victoria Hammond said, her voice low but intense, was built on a single core principle: dignity. James Wilson built this airline to connect people, not to create barriers. He believes that the logo on the tail of our aircraft is a promise, and that promise is upheld or broken by the actions of every single employee. What you did was not just an insult to a passenger. It was an insult to Mr. Wilson, to the 50,000 employees of this company, and to the very principles it was founded on. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Your conduct was not a mistake. It was a betrayal. Vanessa finally broke. The tears she had been holding back began to stream down her face, hot and silent. They were not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. Tears for her lost job, her shattered pride, her uncertain future. I have been with this airline for 22 years, she choked out. 22 years. I have given my life to this job. I've missed birthdays, holidays for this company, and the company has compensated you for that service, Catherine Blackwell said, unmoved. Loyalty is not a shield for misconduct. 22 years of service makes your behavior less excusable, not more. You of all people should have known better. Victoria Hammond stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The investigation will proceed, but your suspension is indefinite. HR will be in touch regarding the final disposition of your employment, but I would advise you to prepare for the worst. The flight we have arranged for you back to New York leaves at 6:00 p.m. tomorrow. An HR escort will meet you at JFK. Please leave your company phone and tablet on the table. Vanessa looked up at her face a mess of running mascara and despair. She saw no pity in Victoria's eyes, no flicker of compassion, only the cold, hard finality of a corporate execution. She was no longer Vanessa Powell, a 22-year veteran flight attendant. She was a liability being managed. She slowly placed her company-issued devices on the table. They clacked against the polished surface, the sound echoing the closing of a door on her entire life. As she stood to leave a broken, shuffling figure, she finally understood. Alex Wilson hadn't gotten her fired. She had gotten herself fired. He had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had been too ugly for the company to ignore. As the glass doors sealed shut on Vanessa's departing form, Victoria Hammond's posture changed subtly. The glacial severity melted into something more professional but distinctly warmer. She turned to the screen where Catherine Blackwell was still visible. That's done, Victoria said with a sigh. A regrettable situation all around. Catherine nodded on the screen. James needs to be briefed immediately. I'll handle it from this end, but he'll want to hear directly from you as well. Of course, Victoria agreed. I'll call him as soon as I've gotten Alex settled at the apartment. How is he? Catherine asked, her tone softer, now genuine concern evident. This couldn't have been a pleasant experience for him. Remarkably composed, Victoria replied with a small shake of her head. He reminds me so much of his father. Same quiet dignity, same analytical approach. He didn't get angry or vengeful. He simply documented everything meticulously and reported it through proper channels. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Catherine observed. Keep me updated on the fallout. I've already started the paperwork for termination. With the evidence we have, it's not a question of if, but when. Understood. I'll be in touch. Victoria ended the call and gathered her materials, sliding them into a sleek leather portfolio. Outside in the executive lounge, Alex Wilson sat quietly reviewing notes on his tablet. He looked up as Victoria entered. All set, he asked, his voice betraying no emotion about what had just transpired. Yes, Victoria confirmed. She's been suspended indefinitely, but between us, termination is a foregone conclusion. The evidence is overwhelming. Alex nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement rather than satisfaction. I've sent you the complete log. It's time-stamped and includes direct quotes where possible. I received it. Extremely thorough. Victoria studied the young man for a moment. You know most people in your position would have made a scene the moment she laughed at your ticket. That wouldn't have helped anything, Alex replied. A public confrontation would have been emotional and temporary. I wanted to document a pattern, not just an isolated incident. Well, you certainly did that. Judge Bennett's email was the cherry on top, a completely independent corroboration from a highly respected frequent flyer. He noticed what was happening early on, Alex said. He was subtle about it, but supportive. Victoria checked her watch. Your car is waiting. The apartment is ready and your itinerary for the internship has been finalized. Your father asked me to remind you to call him this evening Geneva time. I will, Alex promised, gathering his belongings. As they walked through the terminal, Victoria glanced at him. If you don't mind me asking, why didn't you just tell her who you were from the beginning? It would have saved you hours of poor service. Alex considered the question for a moment. If I had identified myself, I would have learned nothing about how she treats regular passengers. My father always says that the true measure of a company isn't how they treat VIPs, it's how they treat every customer regardless of status or connections. Victoria smiled slightly. He does say that, doesn't he? He'll be proud of how you handled this, Alex. I hope so, Alex said simply. They reached the executive exit where a sleek black Mercedes waited. The driver stepped forward to take Alex's bag. I've arranged for a full briefing at the office tomorrow at 10 a.m., Victoria said. Just the senior team, they're eager to meet you. Your internship officially starts on Monday, but we thought you might appreciate a quiet weekend to settle in. That sounds perfect, thank you. As Alex prepared to enter the car, Victoria added, What happened today? It's not representative of who we are as a company. I know that Alex assured her. If it were, my father wouldn't have devoted his life to building Skyline. One employee doesn't define an organization, but how the organization responds to that employee's actions that says everything. Victoria nodded, impressed once again by his maturity. Safe travels, Alex. I'll see you tomorrow. As the car pulled away, Victoria took out her phone and dialed a familiar number. It was answered on the second ring. James. It's Victoria. I've just put Alex in the car. Yes, he's fine. Handled it like a true Wilson. You should be very proud. I'm heading back to the office now to initiate the formal proceedings. Of course. I'll keep you updated every step of the way. She ended the call and looked in the direction of the departing car, a thoughtful expression on her face. What had begun as an ugly incident had revealed something unexpected, a glimpse of the next generation of leadership, quiet and measured, but no less formidable. The black Mercedes glided through the streets of Geneva, its tinted windows shielding Alex from the curious gazes of passers-by. Inside, surrounded by the scent of fine leather and the quiet hum of the climate control, Alex finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp and focused throughout the long flight was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a hollow sensation in his chest. He wasn't angry, not anymore. What he felt was a complex mixture of disappointment, resolve, and a quiet determination that something positive should emerge from this unpleasant experience. For a brief moment he questioned his decision not to reveal his identity earlier. Would it have spared him the discomfort? Certainly. Would it have taught Vanessa a lesson? Perhaps, but it would have taught the wrong lesson not to judge people by their appearance, but to be more careful about who you judge. That wasn't real change. That was just self-preservation. He took out his phone and looked at the time. It was just past 9 a.m. in Geneva, which meant it was 3 a.m. in New York. His father would be asleep, but he knew James Wilson well enough to know that he'd want to hear from his son as soon as possible, regardless of the hour. Alex hesitated, then put the phone away. There would be time for that conversation later when he could approach it with clarity rather than the lingering emotions of the encounter. Geneva unfurled outside his window. Elegant architecture, pristine streets, the glittering expanse of the lake in the distance. Under other circumstances, he would have been drinking in the sights, excited about the summer ahead. Now his mind kept returning to the image of Vanessa's face as the realization of who he was had dawned on her. Not remorse for her actions, but fear of their consequences. The car pulled up to a modern apartment building in an upscale neighborhood. The driver opened his door and retrieved his luggage from the trunk. "The penthouse, Mr. Wilson," the driver said. "Ms. Hammond has arranged for everything you might need. There's a welcome package on the kitchen counter with all the information about the apartment neighborhood and your schedule." "Thank you," Alex replied, accepting the keycard the driver offered. The elevator ascended silently to the top floor. When the doors opened, Alex found himself in a spacious, elegantly appointed apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Lake Geneva and the distant Alps. It was beautiful, serene, and at this moment, utterly overwhelming. He set his bag down and walked to the windows, watching the sunlight play on the lake's surface. This was supposed to be the beginning of an exciting chapter, his first real step into his father's world. Instead, it had begun with an ugly reminder of the barriers that still existed even in spaces designed to transcend them. His phone rang. The screen displayed, "Dad." Alex took a deep breath and answered. "Hey, Dad. Alex." James Wilson's deep voice came through clearly, warm with concern. "Victoria just called me. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Alex assured him. "Just arrived at the apartment. Tell me what happened." "Your version, not the corporate report." Alex recounted the events from the beginning, the gate incident, the series of slights during the flight, his decision to document rather than confront, and finally the arrival in Geneva. James listened without interrupting. When Alex finished, there was a moment of silence on the line. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," James finally said, his voice heavy with a mixture of anger and sadness. "But I want you to know that I'm incredibly proud of how you handled it." "I just did what you taught me," Alex replied. "Document, don't escalate. Focus on facts, not emotions." "There's a difference between knowing the principle and having the discipline to apply it in the moment, especially when you're being personally attacked," James said. "Many grown men with decades more experience wouldn't have shown the restraint and strategic thinking you displayed." Alex moved to the kitchen and found a bottle of water in the refrigerator. "I kept thinking about what you always say, that true character is revealed in how you treat people when you have nothing to gain from them. And true leadership is shown in how you respond when disrespected." James completed the familiar saying. "Alex, I don't want this experience to color your view of the company or your internship. What happened was the failure of an individual, not the organization." I know that Alex assured him. Michael and Sophia were professional and kind. Judge Bennett spoke up when he saw what was happening. The corporate response was immediate and appropriate. The system worked even if one person within it didn't. James sighed. "Victoria is handling the formal proceedings. Ms. Powell will be terminated. That's non-negotiable given the severity and pattern of her conduct. But I'm more interested in what we can learn from this, how we can prevent it from happening to others who don't have your last name to protect them." This was familiar territory. James Wilson's approach to any problem was always to look beyond the immediate incident to the underlying patterns and potential improvements. It was how he had built Skyline from the ground up, constantly refining and elevating. "I have some thoughts on that," Alex said, feeling his analytical mind engage with the challenge. "It's not just about punishing one flight attendant. There's something deeper that needs addressing." "Tell me," James encouraged. Alex hesitated suddenly, feeling the weight of responsibility. He thought about Judge Bennett's comments about his father's own experience with discrimination that had sparked the creation of Skyline. "Dad, I was just one passenger who happened to be in a position to document what happened and have it taken seriously. But how many others experience the same treatment and just have to endure it. Too many, James acknowledged grimly. What struck me was the gap between our corporate values and what actually happens in practice. Alex continued, warming to his subject. Everyone knows Skyline's commitment to dignity on paper. It's in our mission statement and our training materials. But somehow, a 22-year veteran flight attendant still felt comfortable showing blatant prejudice. That suggests a disconnect between stated principles and lived reality. You're right, James said. It's not enough to have the right values written down somewhere. They have to be embedded in everything we do, reinforced at every level, measured and held accountable. Exactly. I need to organize my ideas first, Alex replied. Let me call you back this evening when I've had time to think it through properly. Of course. Get some rest. You've earned it. As they said their goodbyes, Alex felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had begun as an ugly confrontation could become the catalyst for meaningful change if he approached it with the same methodical care he'd shown on the flight. He walked back to the panoramic windows, watching boats crisscross the lake's surface. The mountains in the distance stood solid and permanent, a reminder that some things endured beyond the temporary unpleasantness of human failings. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria Hammond. Full briefing postponed to Monday at your father's request. Take the weekend to settle in. Car will be at your disposal if needed. Call if you require anything. Alex sent a brief acknowledgement, then set an alarm for a 2-hour nap. The flight's fatigue was catching up with him, and he needed clarity for what came next. As he drifted into sleep, his mind was already cataloging ideas, potential approaches, ways to transform this individual incident into organizational improvement. Across the city, in a considerably less luxurious hotel room, Vanessa Powell sat on the edge of a bed, staring at the wall. Her company phone and tablet were gone. Her crew ID was gone. Her uniform hung in the closet, suddenly nothing more than fabric with no authority. 22 years of identity stripped away in less than 22 minutes. She had not yet cried, not really. The tears in Victoria Hammond's office had been performative, a desperate plea for mercy. Now, alone with the reality of what she had done and what it would cost her, she felt hollow. Her personal phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael Garcia. She hesitated, then answered. What do you want? Her voice was flat, defensive. Just checking if you're okay, Michael said, his tone careful. If I'm okay? Vanessa laughed, a harsh sound. I'm suspended, about to be fired, and blacklisted in the industry I've given my entire adult life to. No, Michael. I'm not okay. I'm sorry, he said simply. Are you? Did you tell them everything? Every little mistake I made? Michael's voice hardened slightly. I told them what I saw, Vanessa. Just like Judge Bennett did. Just like Alex Wilson did. And it wasn't little mistakes. It was a pattern of deliberate behavior. He set me up, she hissed. He could have told me who he was from the beginning. Would that have changed how you treated him? Michael asked. Would you have been respectful to him as a person, or just afraid of his last name? The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable, because they both knew the truth. Her silence was admission enough. After a pause, Michael spoke again, his voice softer now. Vanessa, we've worked together for 5 years. I've watched you do this same thing to dozens of passengers who didn't fit your idea of who belongs in first class. This time it happened to be the CEO's son, but it could have been anyone. That's the problem. You never said anything before, she replied bitterly. I did actually, multiple times. You just never listened. And that's on me too. I should have been more direct, filed formal reports instead of trying to smooth things over. I was complicit in my own way, and I'll have to live with that. Vanessa felt a strange mix of anger and revelation. Had her behavior really been that obvious, that consistent? Had she really built a career around deciding who deserved her respect based on superficial judgments? "I have to go," Michael finally said. "We're being debriefed soon. I just wanted to say goodbye. Whatever happens next, I hope you find your way." After he hung up, Vanessa continued to sit motionless, the phone in her hand. Through the thin hotel walls, she could hear the sounds of other guests. Conversations, laughter, a child running down the hallway. Normal life continuing while hers had derailed completely. She had no idea what would come next. The airline industry was small, word traveled fast, and her specialized skills had little application elsewhere. At 48, the prospect of starting over was terrifying. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject line, "Meeting request, Skyline Airlines HR, 9:00 a.m. tomorrow." The body contained only meeting details and a tersely worded reminder to bring all company property still in her possession. In that moment, the full weight of her actions finally crashed down on her. Not just the loss of her job or the humiliation of being escorted back to New York in economy class, but the recognition that she had revealed something ugly about herself, something that couldn't be excused away by stress or misunderstanding. She had judged a young man instantly reflexively based solely on his appearance, and in doing so, she hadn't just hurt him or embarrassed the company. She had betrayed her own humanity. The tears that came then were real hot and painful, wrung from a place of genuine realization rather than self-pity. "What have I become?" she whispered to the empty room. The weekend in Geneva passed quickly for Alex. After his initial rest, he spent hours walking the city, absorbing its rhythm and character. The international atmosphere, the blend of cultures and languages, the sense of history coexisting with modernity, it all provided a welcome distraction from the events of the flight. But his analytical mind never fully disengaged from the problem. Throughout his explorations, he was processing, categorizing, developing a framework for what had happened and how similar incidents might be prevented in the future. On his second day, he met Judge Bennett for coffee at a small cafe overlooking the lake. The judge had reached out through Victoria Hammond, offering his perspective if Alex found it useful. "You know, I've spent 40 years watching how institutions respond to discrimination," the judge said, as they settled at their table. "The typical pattern is depressingly predictable. Express shock. Punish the individual, issue a statement affirming values, then return to business as usual until the next incident." Alex nodded. "That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. This can't just be about one flight attendant." Precisely, Judge Bennett agreed. "What interests me is that you seem to grasp intuitively something many organizations never learn. Individual behavior is shaped by organizational culture, and culture is shaped by structures, not just statements. My father taught me to look for root causes," Alex explained. "He built Skyline partly in response to his own experience with discrimination. But even with his commitment, there's still a gap between intention and reality." The judge stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Tell me, what are you thinking about in terms of a response? I'm developing something I'm calling dignity by design," Alex replied. "The core idea is that we need to make treating people with respect the easiest path to follow, not something that requires special effort or conscious decision-making. Intriguing. How would that work in practice?" Alex leaned forward, energized. 3 components. First, redesign training to focus on behaviors, not just abstract principles. Second, create metrics that measure dignity in service as rigorously as we measure on-time performance or fuel efficiency. Third, build accountability structures that can identify and address patterns before they escalate to incidents. Judge Bennett nodded, impressed. "You're talking about embedding values in operations, not just declaring them. That's sophisticated thinking for someone your age." "I've had a good teacher," Alex said with a small smile. "My father always says that values only matter when they're operationalized." "Your father is a wise man," the judge observed. "I remember when he testified in that discrimination case I mentioned. He wasn't just angry about being denied a seat. He had a vision for how air travel could be different, more respectful, more dignified for everyone regardless of ticket price or appearance. That's still his vision, Alex confirmed. I just want to help make it more fully realized. Well, young man, Judge Bennett said, raising his coffee cup in a small toast, I believe you're on the right track. And if you need an ally in this effort, consider me at your disposal. On Sunday evening, Alex settled into the apartment study with his tablet and began to organize his thoughts. He created a detailed presentation drawing not only on the specific incidents with Vanessa Powell, but on broader patterns he had observed in the travel industry and in his own experiences. At precisely 8:00 p.m. Geneva time, he called his father. "How's the apartment?" James asked after they'd exchanged greetings. "Perfect. The view is incredible. And the city beautiful. I've walked about 20 miles in the last 2 days. But Dad, I want to talk about what happened on the flight." "I thought you might," James replied, and Alex could hear the smile in his voice. "You've been thinking." "I have. And I don't want this to just be about one flight attendant losing her job. There's an opportunity here to address something bigger." "I'm listening." Alex took a deep breath. "What happened to me happens to people every day who don't have the Wilson name to protect them. People who get treated poorly, denied service, made to feel unwelcome, and they have no recourse because they don't have direct access to the CEO or a judge in the next seat documenting everything." "True," James acknowledged. "So I've been thinking about how to fix that. Not just punish individuals after the fact, but create a structure that promotes dignity by design." "Tell me more." Alex began to outline his concept. It wasn't just about sensitivity training or diversity initiatives, though those had their place. It was about creating measurable standards, accountability structures, and feedback mechanisms that would make treating all passengers with dignity the path of least resistance rather than a special effort. The problem with most corporate responses to incidents like this is that they're reactive and individual, Alex explained. Someone behaves badly, they get reprimanded or fired. Everyone expresses shock, and then the same conditions that allowed the behavior in the first place continue unchanged. And your solution, James, prompted a comprehensive program I'm calling Dignity by Design. It would have 3 core components: training, metrics, and accountability. Alex detailed his plan, a complete overhaul of staff training to emphasize dignity as the foundation of service rather than an add-on. New metrics that would measure respectful treatment as rigorously as on-time performance. And accountability structures that would reward consistent dignity in service while identifying and addressing patterns of problematic behavior before they escalated to incidents like his. The key insight, Alex continued warming to his subject, is that most people don't set out to be biased or disrespectful. But in high-stress environments without clear standards or consequences, people default to shortcuts and assumptions. If we want better behavior, we need to design structures that make dignity the easiest path to follow. James was silent for a moment after Alex finished. Then he said, "You've given this a lot of thought." "I have. It's ambitious. It needs to be. Incremental changes produce incremental results. If we want to lead the industry in this area like we do in operational performance, we need to be bold." "You sound like me 20 years ago," James said, a note of pride evident in his voice. "All right, here's what we'll do. Present your concept to Victoria and her team tomorrow. If they see the same potential in it that I do, we'll form a task force to develop it further with you as a key contributor." Really, Alex couldn't keep the excitement from his voice. "Really. This isn't charity or nepotism, Alex. It's recognizing a good idea and the person best positioned to champion it. You experienced the problem firsthand, you've thought deeply about the solution, and you bring a perspective that many of our executives simply don't have. That's valuable." The conversation shifted to logistics, how the presentation should be structured, who would be in the room, what the immediate next steps might be. By the time they hung up, Alex felt a sense of purpose that transcended his original internship plans. What had begun as an ugly incident was transforming into an opportunity for meaningful change. That night, as he prepared for bed, Alex found himself reflecting on how drastically his plans had changed in just a few days. He had come to Geneva expecting to spend the summer learning finance and operations, the technical aspects of the family business. Instead, he was being thrown into something far more fundamental, the human architecture of the company, the invisible structures that shaped how people treated each other. Part of him felt a tremor of uncertainty. Was he ready for this? Did he have enough experience to propose organizational changes to seasoned executives? But then he thought about his encounter with Vanessa, about Judge Bennett's quiet support, about his father's confidence in him. He had seen the problem clearly. Perhaps that clarity of vision was exactly what was needed. The next morning, dressed in a crisp suit rather than the casual clothes he'd planned for his first day, Alex entered the Skyline Airlines Geneva office. Victoria Hammond greeted him personally, leading him to a conference room where the local executive team was assembled. "Everyone," Victoria announced, "this is Alexander Wilson. Many of you know him as James's son, but today he's here with a proposal I think deserves our full attention." Alex stepped forward, tablet in hand, ready to present his vision. As he looked around the room at the attentive faces, he felt none of the nervousness he might have expected. Instead, there was a quiet confidence born of conviction, the belief that from one person's failure of dignity could emerge a structure designed to elevate everyone. "Thank you for meeting with me," he began. "I'd like to talk about how we can make Skyline Airlines not just the most punctual or comfortable airline in the world, but the one that leads the industry in treating every passenger with unfailing dignity. And I believe it starts with a concept I'm calling dignity by design." 1 year later, Alex stood before a lecture hall filled with business students at the University of Geneva. As part of a guest lecture series on ethical leadership, he had been invited to share the Dignity by Design story as a case study in organizational transformation. "The most powerful lesson I learned through this experience," he told the attentive students, "is that true leadership isn't about asserting authority. It's about using influence to build structures where dignity becomes the default, not the exception." He clicked to a slide showing the ripple effects of the program not just within Skyline Airlines but across the industry. Competitors had launched their own versions. Industry associations had created new standards. Regulatory bodies were incorporating the frameworks into passenger rights provisions. What began as one flight attendant's failure has catalyzed change that will affect millions of travelers. Alex continued, "Not because we focused on punishing that individual, but because we recognized the opportunity to address the underlying conditions that allowed her behavior to develop unchecked." A student raised her hand. "But wasn't the flight attendant fired? Isn't that punishment?" "She was held accountable for her actions." "Yes," Alex acknowledged. "Individual accountability is necessary. But if we had stopped there, simply terminated her and moved on, we would have missed the bigger opportunity." The question that drove Dignity by Design wasn't, how do we punish one employee, but how do we create conditions where this behavior becomes the exception rather than a common occurrence? The following week, Alex boarded another Skyline flight, this time returning to New York for a brief visit home. As he settled into his seat, the flight attendant, someone he had never met before, greeted him with genuine warmth. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Wilson," she said, her smile reaching her eyes. "It's an honor to have you with us today." "Thank you," he replied. "But please, it's just Alex." As the aircraft lifted from the runway, carrying him homeward, Alex felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with humiliation and documentation had transformed into recognition and implementation. But more importantly, it had catalyzed his own growth from a young man seeking to prove himself to a leader focused on creating structures that brought out the best in others. Vanessa Powell's laughter at his ticket had been meant to diminish him. Instead, it had revealed the true measure of his character not in his reaction to the insult, but in his response to the opportunity it created. It was a lesson he would carry forward whatever challenges the future might hold, that the most powerful response to disrespect isn't outrage or revenge, but transformation. True justice isn't just about punishing one person's bias. It's about rebuilding structures so that dignity becomes the foundation, not an afterthought. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Alex opened his tablet to review the latest Dignity by Design metrics. The numbers were encouraging, but it was the stories behind them that mattered most. Thousands of travelers experiencing respect, regardless of appearance, millions of interactions shaped by structures designed to elevate rather than diminish. Each one a small victory over the prejudice that had once targeted him. Each one a testament to the power of responding to adversity with vision rather than vengeance. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear that dignity isn't just a word, it's a choice we make every day. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't outrage, but transformation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you